In today's video, we're going to be talking about intonation. Whether you're a beginner, an intermediate player, or a professional, you know that intonation is something that we all have to practice all the time. It's not something that just goes away on its own. So let's dive in and talk about what makes for good intonation. Hi, I'm Ariadna, violinist, Alexander Technique teacher. I teach privately at my studio full-time in Boston, Massachusetts. And this is Mindful Strings, where I help you transform your violin playing using the Alexander Technique principles by relieving tension, refining your posture, and optimizing your every practice session. If you're interested in learning more about the Alexander Technique and trying it out for yourself, I put together a free pre-practice routine for you guys. The link is down in the description box below. It will take you about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's something that you could use before you pick up the violin to practice, or if you just need a quiet break in your day and a little bit more of connection to yourself. So there's this idea about intonation that it's all about the ear, and as long as you have well-trained ears and you hear when things are in tune, you should be able to work on intonation and figure out how to play a passage in tune, repeat it enough times, and lock it in. I can't say that I completely agree with this notion. Yes, your ear is very important. You have to be able to discern pitch and know when you're playing out of tune versus in tune. However, it's not the only thing that leads you to actually playing in tune. Through my years of studying as a violinist and then also teaching students of all ages, one of the biggest issues that I come across in all levels and ages is excessive tension. And you may already be familiar with that yourself. Please drop me a comment down below and let me know if you struggle with tension while playing violin. And tell me if you think it's limiting you in any way. What I see a lot of the time is that if you carry too much tension, you're going to be far less consistent with being able to repeat the passage the same exact way. So even if you hear that it's out of tune, you may not be able to physically fix it. So besides having a good ear, you have to actually have a connection between your ear and your fingertips, which means that everything in between, everything that's required to execute the movements of playing the violin, putting the fingers in the right spot, moving the bow to produce a good sound, everything has to be well coordinated, which means you have to get out of your own way. What happens a lot of the time is that too much muscular tone is engaged in too many places, and so we kind of end up literally getting in our own way of playing. It can be difficult to change that because we're not always aware of the amount of muscular tone that we're actually using to play the instrument. As I went through the 3-year Alexander Technique teacher training program, I learned a lot about my own body and my own technique and my own way of playing, and I actually started hearing the sound of the violin differently, which I'll talk about in a different video, but today we'll just talk about intonation. And so at the root of how we use our extremities, in this particular case our hands and arms, lies the relationship between the head, neck, and back. So if you carry any excess tension in your neck, chances are you have excess tension in your shoulders, which means that your hands are going to be affected as well. I talk about this a lot in my videos that, having the posture component and the setup all lined up is pretty important. So the very first thing you have to do is check in with your neck. That would be step 1. Being able to free your neck while still holding the violin up is not as easy as it sounds, but with enough practice and repetition, you will get there. Step 1 would be to actually become aware of how much extra work are your muscles putting in. So if your neck is free and your shoulders stay neutral and the weight of your head is holding the violin as well as the hand, what has to happen here is that your hand has to be completely free, which means your wrist has to be free so that you can do vibrato. Your fingers have to be free so that they put on just the right amount of pressure on the string to get the full sound. And then, very importantly, your thumb has to be free as well. You should be able to glide your thumb on the neck lightly. Depending, of course, on what position you are in on the violin, will change where the thumb lands exactly. But if we're talking about 1 through 3, the thumb should be traveling with the hand. What neuroscience suggests is that we practice intonation in very tiny bits, which would be groups of maybe 2 to 5 notes. Before you play, you always want to check in with your body. I like to do a full body scan, but particularly noticing the ground under my feet and just checking in with the fact that gravity is helping me and I don't have to tense up my legs or hold myself up in any way. And then checking in with the neck and head, as I said, allowing the neck to be free, letting your whole spine to lengthen, letting your back lengthen and widen. And then you can just see how you relate to a single note. Let's say, for simplicity's sake, I'll just play the opening of the Bach Presto. It's all in first position, but it's fast, and there's plenty of room for error. First, I want to make sure that I find the first note reliably, which means I can take the arm off, check in with my body again, allow my neck to be free, and then I'm going to think from the fingertip on my left hand as I raise it up to the violin and I hear the G in my head. All right, that was a hair sharp. Then I'm going to move on to adding another note. So that's not a great sound. I want to make sure that my pinky is putting on enough pressure to actually make the tone come out. It's very hard not to talk about sound quality while we're talking about intonation because it's all kind of connected. By the way, in case you're not aware of this, pay attention to how the tone sounds when something's out of tune, because you'll notice that the instrument does not resonate nearly as well when the pitch is off. The key is that as you progress through a passage, that you don't get carried away by having all your focus back in your left hand and just hyper-focusing on listening to the notes, but you can actually stay with yourself and continue releasing the neck and head and continue thinking of the arms as coming out of your back, so you're all one unit. It can be particularly challenging when something is fast. So one of the things that I like to do is using the metronome to keep myself playing a passage really, really slowly and then speeding it up very gradually. So instead of using a quarter note as a beat, I'll use an eighth note or sometimes even a 16th note so that I can really go like 1 or 2 notches on the metronome at a time, continuing to send these directions, keeping the awareness with what I'm doing with my body. The other thing to note about this is that the intonation piece doesn't actually come overnight, so you might have to practice the same shift or passage for 10-15 minutes a day for maybe a number of weeks before it really locks in and becomes super reliable. But the muscle memory piece of it, in terms of how you're hearing things and then also your ability to release the excess tension, will build a foundation to kind of make the work a little bit easier for the subsequent shifts and passages that you have to practice. There's a term in Alexander technique called end gaining, which is when we really hyper-focus on the result instead of staying conscious through the process. So I would say the key of productivity lies in keeping your practice as intentional as possible and being as in touch with yourself as possible. I invite you to pick apart the section that you may be struggling with right now, which, by the way, if you're working on a piece right now that you feel like there's some intonation struggles that you're going through that you just can't overcome, let me know down in the comments below. I'm really curious to know what you guys are working on right now. And I invite you to break it down into the tiniest sections of taking just a handful of notes and trying to remove the pressure and expectation of what that final result is going to be and just see just how slowly you can go and how much you can continue noticing if you're gripping with your hand, with your thumb, if you're gripping with your neck, if you're squeezing your glutes or your legs become tense, and just kind of focus on the body, and I promise you that over time, if you're able to gain more conscious control of your own function, all the other things will fall into place. Happy mindful practicing, and I'll see you next time.